So what do Americans think is even worse than big evil oil? Well, according to a new poll, it's the government. The first time in Gallup polling history, only 17% of Americans have a favorable view of the federal government. This means the feds have hit rock bottom as they are now the most unpopular industry in the nation. Here to discuss are the freedom fighters, filmmaker and director of The Cartel, Bobby Bowden, radio host Nancy Skinner, and Suffolk University economics professor and Independent Institute senior fellow Ben Powell. Ben, let's start with you. The idea that the federal government is the most unpopular of all industries is almost baffling in this big government era that we live in.
It's not baffling to me at all. It should be the least popular because it's fundamentally different than all of the other industries out there. Listen, if you don't like Ford, don't buy their car. The worst they can do is give you advertisements that try to convince you to buy it. Try not buying what the government's selling. They take the money from you involuntarily through your taxes. If you say, no, you know what, I don't like that foreign war, I'm going to just deduct that from my taxes and not send it in, the tax man's coming to get you. If you resist, you're going to jail, and even worse, they're using violence against you. Theft should be unpopular, whether done privately or institutionalized through the government. I'm just disappointed 17% of Americans actually view it favorably.
Nancy, this has got to be bad news for the administration, who really is fixated on big government doing everything from you, private public partnerships and infrastructure banks, and we're going to save the day. This is not good news for the White House.
You know, I'd like to see this poll number after Hurricane Irene, because I saw Republican governors heaping praise on the federal government and President Obama for how well they did when they needed them in a crisis. But I will tell you, this poll in particular talks about industries. A poll in the New York Times broke down different groups. 1 favorite to 24. And Democrats were 11, Obama was 13, Republicans were 16, and the Tea Party came in dead last at 24 because of the debt ceiling. And that is what they don't like, is they don't like dysfunctional government, and the federal government's been demonized since Ronald Reagan, Charles. It's
been demonized, Bob, but here's the thing, though. At this level, what do you think is causing this? Because you cover the educational aspect of this, and I think one of the central items in this country is that people are fed up with the way their kids are not being educated. That's one of the reasons they're angry at local governments, and the reality is the federal government is overseeing all of this.
Well, that's right. No Child Left Behind is a federal education initiative. I do think that frustration with education has permeated the social consciousness, the culture, the larger culture in general, that in a way that 5 or even 2 years ago it hadn't been. But I would also just urge a little caution. 17% here, it says, holds positive view of federal government. It would be wishful thinking on my part as a libertarian to think that means the rest, 83%, are all libertarians. I think that's not really correct. There are also part of that 83% maybe who don't hold the positive view is people that think the government should be doing more. They wanted, you know, single-payer health care under Obama and didn't get it. And so there's that group. There's also the group that, you know, maybe they like their congressmen, but they disapprove of Congress in general, and just that kind of group that maybe they say they disapprove of the federal government, but they do like their Social Security and do like their Medicare and do like the military. So there are parts of the federal government that are probably more popular.
So Ben, sounds like Bob is sort of agreeing with Nancy, or giving Nancy some props here, saying, listen, you know, maybe this isn't just anti-government, but it's something else more nuanced. What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah, I completely agree. I wish it wasn't as nuanced. I'm sure some of them are big government apologists who just wish the government would be bigger, too. But I think they should object to it because it is using theft as opposed to all those other industries.
And Nancy, I mean, that's the one thing we really can't ignore. I mean, everyone knows the deficit problem is a serious problem. People are concerned about it. We know that the federal government is spending wildly. And it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. You can say over the last 6 years, it's ballooned pretty big. So people are worried about that because ultimately it impacts their family, it impacts their children and their grandchildren. And that's a good enough reason for most to be upset with the federal government.
But you know what, Charles? Every poll shows that Americans are more worried about the unemployment in this country than they are the deficit. Not that the deficit is not a problem, but when people can't work and they're desperate, they want jobs. And the Fed has run out of policy tools to be able to create jobs, and private sector sitting on huge profits.
Well, these two issues are related. These two issues are related, Nancy. The two issues are related. A big deficit implies future taxations, which keeps business investment on the sideline. Take care of the deficit, and you're putting a better environment in there for businesses to grow and create jobs that are actually productive instead of the crazy ones that Washington will do.
How does that create jobs?
a good business environment where they make investments to create products that serve consumers, you have to put people to work to do that. The job itself is a bad thing.
How do you do that?
Hold on, guys. Let's shift gears here a little bit because perhaps the reason the federal government has had such a low approval rating is because it wastes so much money. A bipartisan commission has found that at least $1 in every $6 the U.S. is spending on contracts and grants in Iraq and Afghanistan over the past decade has been wasted. The report co-author warns that more could be wasted again in major changes in law and policies if they aren't changed and implemented fast and quick. So, Bob, I'll come back to you. You wanted to get in there.
Yeah.
And we kind of know, people know, listen, the war, how could a war cost $1 trillion? I mean, a lot of money slipping through the cracks.
Yeah. So this is an independent panel that determined $1 out of $6 spent on the Afghanistan war was wasted. I'd be interested to know their definition of waste because in my own independent survey, $6 out of $6 has been wasted in the Afghanistan war. And so I guess I have a different data. We're disagreeing on the data there. But yeah, I mean, look, not to mention all the other military involvement.
You know, Ben, I have a friend who works over there, a private contractor who's in Afghanistan now. He's been in Iraq, and the stories of waste that he tells me are beyond the pale. Why aren't these getting more, get more play in the public, and why can't something be done about it?
Well, I don't know about the more play in the public, but there is a fundamental point here. When government's making massive expenditures on anything, it doesn't have the profit motive like private businesses do to curtail waste, so it invariably pops up. But I got to say, I'm sympathetic with the $6 out of $6 comment because a lot of people think that these wars have actually made Americans more in danger. And if that's the case, the whole thing's waste because we've had a counterproductive program.
Yeah, this is where libertarians need to take on the neocons, too.
And, you know, and Nancy, the idea that we went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan for economic gains is certainly a fallacy, isn't it?
You know, we might have a trifecta here because I think we all agree on this, that this was a big waste of money here, all in all. Absolutely. And you know what? On top of the waste that goes there, the military budget is $800 billion, and it's like sacrosanct. You can't touch it. It's a sinkhole. You know, oil before 9/11 was $1.25 a gallon. After 9/11, it went up, to it was like 80, up to 150 a barrel, down to 80 finally. So the Texas miracle, the defense, oil industries, the military-industrial complex, as Eisenhower
Now you're trying to segue into Perry. We're not talking about that. Listen, we had a trifecta. Let's leave it there because somewhere the judge is smiling. Okay, well, 15% of the U.S. population relies on food stamps, but is the program causing more harm than help? We've got the shocking details on that next. Big stock market swings have become the norm in the past few weeks. Now, some analysts fear all this stock market volatility indicates moral hazard is back and in a big way as investors make risky bets assuming that the government will come to the rescue if a crisis surfaces again. With the possibility of more stimulus from the Fed hanging in the balance, how will markets ever wean off cheap government money? Nancy, how's the market going to deal with this without the Fed intervening?
No, that's what markets do. They bet. They're casinos. When the hurricane was coming, you saw oil prices shoot up and insurance go down. Stimulus is the same way. Short-term traders really benefit because they know that the stimulus is going to help the economy, and that's why it's working. It's the option of last resort, Charles.
I don't know, Ben. It might be the option of first resort. We found out the Fed pumped up $1.2 trillion secretly the banks to keep them propped up. Is this kind of illusionary thing capitalism? Is it free markets? What is it?
Yeah, listen, you want markets to bet on price movements, but you don't want them betting because someone else is going to flip the bill if they lose. That's the real problem here. It has to be a profit and loss system when entrepreneurs and investors who make mistakes get punished with losses. Instead, when you create an environment of heads we profit, tails the taxpayers pay the bill, you get too much speculation and betting that's not good for anyone. It's exactly what moral hazard is.
And on the other side of that, of course, Bob, is the notion that somehow the notion of risky bets, the government intervening, saying, hey, we don't want Wall Street to make any kind of bets. Is that taking the pendulum too far the other way?
Oh, gee, I don't think you have to worry about Wall Street not making bets that are in their interest to make money. I think they'll do that every time. But look, we bail out General Motors and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and, more or less, AIG certainly. Like, it does seem like there's no end. There is some caution here, which is when you say why markets are doing what they're doing. Having been a financial reporter for years myself, I know that that's kind of perilous because oftentimes you don't really know exactly why the market's moving the way it is. But, you know, people will often say there was a lot of selling today on Wall Street when, in fact, there's an equal number of buying and selling on every day.
Right.
But that said, yeah, no, I think this is it's just a mess that we can't sort of flush the toilet, if you'll pardon the expression, and we have to continue to build debt higher and higher for fear of the pain.
But here's the thing, though, Nancy. It seems like President Obama is sort of hinting at more spending, perhaps more bailouts. Certainly Dodd-Frank has made the too big to fail situation worse, and that's what we saw last week with Bank of America and some of the others. So is this administration, you think that they would be willing to say, hey, we're not going to stop in. There's not going to be a TARP 2. There's not going to be stimulus. There's not going to be any more favors for these big businesses. If they fail, we simply will let them fail.
That's what Dodd-Frank does. It says, listen, we're never going to let this happen again. We don't want too big to fail. So they set up an organized system, just like we have with the FDIC, so that they can dismantle industries and we don't have to bail them out again. It is exactly what it did. And you know what? This whole idea of moral hazard, the fact is the bigger problem is that no one has jobs. And companies aren't going to start hiring again because everybody's unemployed and they're broke. So until we create jobs with stimulus, with infrastructure, rebuilding our schools, our electricity grid, all those things, we're not going to get companies hiring again.
Right.
We're at a stalemate. It's a dead end right now.
So along the line of that thinking, more than 45 million Americans, or about 15% of the population, now turn to the government for food stamps. That's an increase of 74% since 2007. Bob, is this a sustainable program?
Yeah, I was surprised by this number. 74%, you know, close to doubling since 2007 is amazing. And this isn't even counting the WIC program for women and infants and children. There are a number of these programs. You know, in my opinion, the first thing to do is, you know, I believe in federalism in the 10th Amendment. Why really should this be a federal program? Shouldn't states administer their own programs along these lines? And that way you could have experiments, you could have different innovations, you could learn from different states that try different things. It really, in my opinion, has no business being federal.
You know, Nancy, you were just talking about, I know, liking programs like this, or, you know, government pouring money, the multiplier effect. But isn't at the end of the day, doesn't this backfire? Doesn't this take away people's incentive to work? Doesn't this harm them? You know, it seems like it never has worked anywhere that I can see where food stamps and welfare have been in place for a long period of time.
Well, it's funny that your guest said we could experiment, between food and starvation? I mean,
no, I'm saying have the states do different programs. The states could try different kinds of initiatives to make people more responsible and get them off the program.
But here's what you're missing. Here's a fundamental problem here. It's cause and effect. The effect is food stamps. The cause was a killer recession where we lost 8 million jobs. People don't go on food stamps because they want to. Trust me.
No, it's
we lost so many jobs and we haven't been able to recover those jobs.
Well, hold on one second. I will say this,
like
Ben,
lazy
people may not go on them because they want to, but they have a hard time getting off of them. I can tell you that from firsthand experience, too. What do you think should be done?
2 points here. One reason that the numbers are so far up is because all of the stimulus package and bailouts that Nancy apologizes for haven't worked. That's why so many people are on it. Second, the alternative isn't starvation. Historically, there's a long tradition in the United States of civil society taking care of those in need. So sometimes it used to be family members and church groups, but importantly, historically it was mutual aid societies, groups sometimes locally, sometimes nationally, where people paid their dues, and when members fell on hard times, they took benefits from the organization. These things weren't trivial. The Independent Order of Odd Fellows, which in itself is an odd name, was one national group in the mid-19th century. In the middle of the century, they spent more than $1 billion in these type of transfers. What happened was food stamp programs and other government programs crowded it out.
Quickly, Nancy.
Public charities are going to replace the our social safety net. Before Social Security, 2/3 of our elderly were in poverty. 2/3.
Okay.
So are you
Before
saying that
Social Security, lots of America was in
Nancy,
poverty.
get the last word on this. We're going to have to wrap it up. You guys have been fantastic. The audience, you've been fantastic, too. I'm Charles Payne. I'm keeping an eye on freedom on behalf of Judge Andrew Napolitano.